It is now very clear that the Nigerian government has to put the square peg in the square hole to reposition the country's economy, especially now that more analysts are calling on the government to tap into other sources of revenue generation. They have continued to talk about diversifying the economy away from total dependence on oil, and one area they are looking at is tax. Well, welcome to Business Nigeria. I am Tolulope Ogunjobi. Well, a warm welcome to you again. Now, taxation is an aspect of government fiscal policy and it is a means of revenue generation. Taxation can be used to expand, stimulate, or restrict a country's economy depending on the direction of the government. Nigerian government sees review of the tax policy as a more sustainable option to raise government revenue in order to make up for the drop in crude oil prices.
In a bid to support the federal government's revenue base, the Federal Executive Council approved a new tax regime and also announced its intention to raise taxes on luxury goods. Minister of Finance Kemi Adeosun, who announced the approval of the new tax policy, says the revised national tax policy is meant to review the tax rates in certain areas. She went further to say that the government would work with the National Assembly for the amendment of certain tax laws before the commencement of the policy. Adeosun pointed out that taxes on luxury goods would certainly be increased, leaving some basic commodities. The prevailing negative economic environment is worrisome, as it has had an adverse effect on the performance of the Federal Inland Revenue Service, the nation's most important revenue agency.
Let's emphasize more on indirect taxation. Then apart from this, the administration need to really come up in terms of training. What do we do wrong here that others are doing right in other claims? I think we need to really learn what is happening in other claims.
Effective tax administration comprises of quite a number of things. First of all, there's the skill set. So you need trained personnel, trained staff who actually know what the laws are, but who also know how to explain it to taxpayers in language that they can understand, because that's the way in which you're going to get part of the buy-in. But also, a significant part of that as well is transparency and accountability. So people need to know what's happening to the money that is being collected. They need to be certain that when they are paying their taxes, they're going to be used and they're getting to the right place.
At the closing figures at December the 31st, 2016, collection by the Federal Inland Revenue Service fell grossly below the government's target and that of the agency. Hence the need for urgent steps not only to save the Nigerian economy from slipping into depression, but also to boost revenue in order to settle immediate recurrent obligations. In this regard, the Federal Executive Council approved a revised national tax policy to address low taxation in the country. According to the Minister of Finance, the main thrust of the tax policy is to establish fundamental principles to guide and orderly develop the Nigerian tax system towards meeting its objectives. It also recognizes the importance of the taxpayers as well as their rights and duties. Nigeria's tax contribution to the gross domestic product (GDP) is said to be the lowest in the world, with about 6%. Its value-added tax is also said to be the lowest in the world at 5%. The minister further says consumers of luxury goods would henceforth pay a higher value-added tax. This explains why the value-added tax budget has been increased from 198 billion naira in 2016 to 242 billion naira in the 2017 budget. That's about 22% increase.
Well, with me in the studio is West Africa's tax head, as PricewaterhouseCoopers PwC, Taiwo Oyedele. Thank you for joining us on Business Nigeria. Well, the package before the interview segment, tax. I want to start this way. The revised national tax policy finally has been approved by the Federal Executive Council. What should we expect? Give us some details, because I know you're part of all of this process.
Yeah, indeed. I think that's one thing we need to commend this administration for. It's commendable that we've been able to, in a short while, revise the national tax policy, and now that has received the blessing of the Federal Executive Council. And it's a remarkable improvement from the original version of the national tax policy. And it seeks to address different aspects of taxation and the tax system. Not only just policy itself, which sets the tone, you also have aspects to do with legislation, you have aspects to do with administration, you have aspects to do with the ease of paying taxes, you have aspects to do with international treaties like double taxation, multilateral agreement. So it's far-reaching, and I think that if we're able to implement properly, this will change Nigeria's narrative with regards to taxation.
Talking about implementation, that's always been a challenge, but I'm going to go to implementation. Many have argued that this might not be the right time to increase some particular form of taxes, particularly at this time when we all know that we are in recession. It's no more news. What do you make of this?
Yeah, so to be honest, the intention and the idea behind the national tax policy is not to raise taxes. We're not increasing tax rates or introducing new taxes. It's pretty much to look at reform generally. Now, the comment by the finance minister about VAT on luxury tax is something that is going to happen down the line, not something that is immediate. This might be another 3 years, it might be 4 years, but the whole idea is there are certain things that are basic and there are certain things that are luxury in nature. To have a meal, for example, if you want to take a bar or you want bread, I'll say it's basic. Now, to add ice cream on top is luxury. I can then say, well, as government, to one, address inequality, and two, to ensure that people pay according to their ability to pay. It's not right to ask everybody to pay 5%. So when a poor man is consuming what he needs to survive, he pays 5%. A rich man is buying a golden plated wristwatch or iPhone 7 Plus, also paying 5%. That person has more ability to pay more. So the whole idea is down the line, we're going to get to a point where we either exempt basic items or apply zero rate of VAT on them. And then the things that are not basic, then we raise the VAT rate. One, to generate more revenue for Nigeria, and two, so we can align with the rest of ECOWAS, because ECOWAS needs to get to a point where the differential in the VAT rate is not too significant. At the moment, Nigeria has the lowest of that block. We have 5%, the rest of West Africa, 15, 18, even 20%.
This is really serious. Huh?
Yeah.
Now, let's look at the tax. Taxes on specific that are going to the luxury goods. I don't know. Some have said this might not be a move to really make the tax system more progressive. If so, what principles do you think needs to be applied to cover that aspect of the luxury tax? How proper do you think it will be done? Because yeah, I agree with your example, but many have still argued that this luxury tax issue, I don't know. Give more insight into it, please.
Okay, so this is the thing about taxation. So if you have a tax law that is making the poor and the rich to pay the same amount of tax or the same rate of tax, then that tax system is regressive, which means it makes the poor people to be poorer and therefore widens the gap of inequality. Now, which is why I give the example of VAT. The plan is not to introduce a special tax called luxury tax. It's more to reform the VAT system. There's so many things that are wrong with the VAT system, by the way. It's not just the rate. And so that we get to a point where our VAT system is in line with the rest of the world, and then we get to have a decent VAT rate, especially on items that are not basic. If you take out food item, you take out educational materials or education itself, pharmaceutical products, you pretty much cover what the poor people would normally consume and need to consume to survive. The rest of it is luxury. If I can afford to buy a bulletproof brand new car for 60 million, it's not bad. It just means that I have more ability to pay tax. Maybe I should pay 15% VAT on top of that. So we can use my money to fix the road that everybody will ply on, including the poor people. So at the moment, the tax system in Nigeria is regressive. Even if you look at personal income tax, even though the band and the tax rates are graduated, you find that a man who is barely earning 50,000 per month and can hardly survive because you need to do transportation, you need to do meal at work, you need to feed your family and parents, is still paying tax. Why should that be? In the UK, if you earn about £11,000 per annum or less, you pay zero tax because they consider that you're so poor and you're struggling to survive. If you convert that to Naira, even if you use the official exchange rate, that's about 5 million Naira. And here we are, somebody is earning even 20,000 per month, and you're asking them to pay tax. That's so unfair. Okay. So what we're trying to do with the new policy is try and protect the vulnerable people, the poorest people in the country, and get the middle class and the rich. The point is not that we are trying to criminalize wealth. It's okay to be successful, but we're just saying, please pay a little bit more so we can take care of everybody.
Interestingly, I really like it breaking it down for everybody to understand how it really affects the man on the street. But the man on the street would also ask you, aside from states like Lagos, which I give props to, looking at the tax system, it's a little bit efficient, and we can see at least some projects being executed with all of the taxpayers' money and all of it. But Nigerians have always kept on asking government, what about we've been paying? What's been happening to what we've been paying? Have you been using these funds judiciously for us to really see that we are even ready to pay more? That is where that comes in. What's been happening to what's been paid? And Nigerians really, are they really encouraged to oblige to, paying tax?
Yeah, so this is actually a very complex question to deal with. So on one hand, you find that many Nigerians will tell you they're paying tax and they're paying tax and they're paying tax. But you find more often than not, it's not tax they're actually paying, they're paying some other things. So when the market woman goes to the market and they stop her and say, you must pay this, they just tout. But as far as that person is concerned, they think it's tax. Because really, if Nigerians were paying taxes as much as they're saying they're paying, our tax to GDP ratio would not be 6%. In fact, it's actually less than 6% now. Yeah. So most countries, even in Africa, are doing 25%, 30%. We're doing 4-5%. So which means it's very low. But it doesn't take away the fact of the question you've asked, which is even if it was 1% tax to GDP ratio, we should know how it's being spent. Now, this is something that has been missing in Nigeria for so long: transparency and accountability. If you look at even the budgeting process, some of the issues we have is just because we are not transparent enough. When things are not transparent, you give the room and the incentive for people to steal. I was listening to the radio on my way here, and they said that in the Treasury's single account, we now have about 5 trillion. Yeah. These are monies that people left in different government accounts, in different agencies that they never reported. So you prepare the budget and say we're spending 5 trillion naira. At the end of the year, it hasn't been fully implemented, and you don't tell us what happens to the balance of the money you made that you haven't spent. Now, the same thing with tax. Whether it's 1 naira you collected, whether it's 1 trillion naira, what did you use the money for? Now, when you provide accountability, and people can see taxpayers' money at work, then not only do you have the legal right to collect tax from them, you then earn the moral justification for them to continue to pay tax. So that's a very valid point. But I think it's a both sides to it. Government, on one hand, has to embrace transparency and accountability. But more importantly, the people and the business community must demand that accountability. Nigerians need to start saying, you know what, we have to see the makeup of the budget. We have to see the detail of what each MDA is spending, how they are spending it. Once you have that transparency, half of the problem about corruption is solved.
Interesting. Now, Mr. Tai, we're going to go on a break, and we'll be back with more on Business Nigeria. We'll be back, Mr. Tai will still be here to give insights into issues surrounding taxation in the country. Stay with us on the show. Well, thank you for staying with us. You're watching Business Nigeria, and we're looking at taxation in Nigeria, particularly the revised national tax policy. And with me in the studio is the West African tax head, PwC PricewaterhouseCoopers. Mr. Taiwo Oyedele has been giving insight into all of these issues. Now, back to the revised policy. I want us to look at the key factors, the key points, the key areas in this new policy, because Nigerians are a lot of expectations. Now, let's break it down. Let's look at some areas, some aspects in it.
Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. So it's not a very big document. Because the principle for us was, let's keep it simple. So once we want people to understand the direction in which government is going with regards to the tax system, and two, you need to really understand to be able to comply. If it's too complicated, then you're losing the whole thing. Now, some of the key areas that have been addressed in this revised national tax policy includes one is to do with SMEs. So the policy says that small, medium enterprises should pay much less tax than they are currently paying. So which means we will reduce their tax rate. Of course, bear in mind that some of the things we have in the policy, you still have to legislate. So this doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow just because it's been approved. So we still need to engage with National Assembly, draft a bill, but this is the direction. So SMEs will then be paying lower taxes. Poorest people in Nigeria will be exempted from paying income tax. So there will be a threshold that will be established. That hasn't been agreed yet, but in principle it's been agreed that poorest people should not pay income tax. And then you find that if you consider something like value-added tax, currently in our law, there's no threshold, which means if someone, after graduating from school, can't find any job to do, and then they borrowed 5,000 naira and they start selling biscuits and groundnuts, they have to start charging VAT immediately. They need to register with the tax authority, get the forms, charge VAT and remit it. On top of 5,000 naira, the person can't even cope. The transport money to go and submit the form will wipe away the whole business, including malams or whoever is selling biscuits in front of your house. Everybody needs to register for VAT. Now, that's not realistic. It's like setting everybody up for failure and evasion and violation of the law. In many countries, there are thresholds created that will say if your annual turnover is less than, say, 10 million naira, don't worry about VAT. Now, that also is protecting micro, small, and medium enterprises so that they don't have too much burden about compliance and tax, and they can then grow. As they grow and their turnover increases, they have more ability to cope with filing tax returns, employing an accountant or a tax practitioner, and so on and so forth. So that also has been covered in this national tax policy. Another area is to do with, I'll say politics, let me put it that way. In many countries, and I'm sure you know very well about this, when they are talking about election, number one issue in most cases is taxation. Even Donald Trump, everybody is saying, what is going to be the policy around tax? What will you do for us? Will you raise our taxes? Will you reduce it? In Nigeria, you find our politicians don't even, some of them don't even have a clue about the tax system. Many of them haven't even paid their own taxes. And then they get into a position of authority. They're totally confused because they haven't been paying taxes before. So what we have put in that policy now is INEC has to mandate every political party to come up with, one, their understanding of the existing policy, and then the direction in which they're going to take Nigeria and Nigerians with regards to the tax system, so that we can hold them accountable. Now, if they haven't said anything, there's nothing to hold them on to. So that's another one. And you also find things to do with ease of paying taxes. Now, currently, Nigeria is one of the most difficult places on earth to pay tax, which is like an irony. On one hand, we need tax revenue. On another hand, we make it almost impossible for people to comply. It's too complicated. Now, in this national tax policy, there's a requirement for Nigeria to establish an office of tax simplification. So what that office will be doing is looking on a day-to-day basis, what can we do to make paying taxes easier today than it was yesterday? There's a target for us to move up to about top 20 in the world in another few years. And also overall for Nigeria to become more competitive. Many of our businesses can't even compete. And there are issues with even the foreign exchange control issue, exchange rates, importation. what we have been doing in Nigeria is trying to use monetary policy tools to address fiscal policy problems. We should not have banned any 41 items from eligibility for FX. What you should have done in most countries is leave everybody to import whatever they want. But things you want to discourage, you increase the import duty rate and the VAT on importation. So that way, you don't have imbalances and all these upsets in the economy that has created almost 11 different rates, and now we are struggling with how to solve those problems.
Indeed, it's really worrisome. But before we round up, what about the awareness level? Nigerians need to be aware. That will take me to the issue of the PIB, when the stakeholders came out to say we're not carried along and all of that. In all of this, are all the stakeholders carried along, and Nigerians really getting aware of all of this?
Yeah, excellent question. On one hand, the level of interest in Nigeria by almost everybody, including poor, rich, businesses, private sector, informal sector, the level of interest in tax is very low. Sometimes people only get interested when they knock at their door and they say you haven't paid tax. But the process we went through to do this revised national tax policy was actually very robust. So we had publications in newspapers, we had series of engagements in Abuja, in Lagos. We wrote to all key stakeholders, whether it's MAN, whether it's NASIMA, whether it's professional bodies like CITN, ICANN, even MBA. We wrote to including all the 36 state governments. We also communicated with local governments. So there was a lot of engagement that went on. Hopefully, people will start picking interest now, because that awareness is key. Without tax education and awareness, we will not be able to go far. So that's a very important one. I think the media also has a role to play in helping us to educate Nigerians.
Indeed, and we would also definitely do our parts, and just like we're doing that here too. I must thank you, West African Tax Head, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, for your time on Business Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Giving insight into this and making Nigerians understand what we intend to achieve with the new tax policy. Well, away from that now, Angola has taken over from Nigeria. That's from Nigeria's position of Africa's top oil producer. That's according to the report by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The report released on Monday showed that Angola's current production stands at 1.651 million barrels per day, while Nigeria's output, on the other hand, is below 1.6404 million barrels per day. Algeria lost the top producer spot to Nigeria in December 2016. Meanwhile, crude oil prices have again dropped in the global market following weak demand for energy commodities. At the London market, the Brent trades lower at $55 per barrel as dealers maintain reluctance to pay higher price pegs. Analysts have sensed lower revenues for oil producers if the condition persists in the coming weeks. I beg your pardon. For the OPEC basket, the price drops to $53 for a barrel. And that's all we have for you today on Business Nigeria. Join us again another time. On behalf of the entire production crew, I thank you for watching. I am Tolu Lokpe Ogunjobi. I leave you with the figures of the exchange rate as it stands today.